Have you ever wondered why some women live alone without a boyfriend, without a partner, without even seeming to look for someone? The answer isn't in loneliness, nor in a lack of options, nor in romantic disappointments. It lies in something that makes people uncomfortable, that scares them, and that deconstructs everything we were taught about the role of women. Because when a woman chooses to be alone, she is not losing herself. She is reconnecting. And that reconnection doesn't bring applause, likes, or company. It brings silence, strength, and a type of freedom that most still do not understand. No, she is not solitary. She is selective. She is not cold. She is simply tired of burning for those who never wanted to warm up. There is something profoundly threatening about a woman who doesn't need a relationship to feel complete, because it breaks the logic of control, dismantles the myth of emotional dependency, and reveals a brutal truth. Most men don't know what to do with a woman who doesn't need to be saved, and most women are still learning to recognize themselves in that mirror of silent but deafening power. Before I continue, I would like you to tell me in the comments what is the best time for you to post my videos. Now let's continue. Carl Jung said that everything we deny becomes a shadow, and many of these women who are alone are actually the reflection of the collective shadow. They are what everyone wants to be, but few have the courage to hold on to. They don't shout for love. They whisper choices. They don't display themselves to attract. They retreat to preserve themselves. They are less interested in charming princes and more connected to their peace. And that makes people uncomfortable, because while the world demands urgency to be with someone, they have discovered the power of being with themselves. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend is not lost. She is on another level where things aren't asked for, they are chosen. Where nothing is begged for, it is observed. Where approval isn't sought, presence is imposed. And maybe that's why she wakes so much criticism, so much judgment, so many attempts to explain or label her. But what many still don't understand is that behind that apparent absence exists a presence that fills, transcends, and challenges the prevailing emotional order. She doesn't want any love. She wants something that doesn't make her smaller. And until that comes, she remains firm, whole, complete. You may not understand it now. You might even think it's exaggeration, pride, or disguised lack. But deep down, very deep down, there's a discomfort inside you, a question that pulses even when you try to ignore it. What if that silent path is actually the only one that awakens the most important love of all, the one that begins with you? The silence that surrounds a woman alone is not emptiness, it's a sanctuary. And those who don't understand the value of that space tend to call her cold, inaccessible, or even arrogant. But what few perceive is that she didn't build that strength to push the world away. She built it not to lose herself. Carl Jung said that everything we don't face within ourselves, we end up projecting onto others. And maybe that's why so many women confuse loneliness with absence, when in reality it may be the fertile ground for self-knowledge. While most seek to fill themselves through external connections, this woman turned her gaze inward, and there, in the vastness of her unconscious, she confronted the specters she avoided for years: childhood wounds, unspoken abandonments, attachments disguised as love. The decision to be alone was not the fruit of an open wound, but of a scar that finally healed. She didn't stop believing in love. She simply stopped accepting what they called love, which always made her shrink. This woman knows chaos. She has loved until losing herself. She has given too much. She has begged for crumbs that should never have been offered. But at some point, she woke up. And that awakening wasn't sudden. It was a succession of disappointments that stopped hurting and started teaching. What you see now is not coldness. It's emotional maturity. And maturity scares people because it demands presence, depth, and truth. She doesn't want just any company. She wants reciprocity. She is no longer attracted to promises, but to real presences. And maybe that's exactly why she seems inaccessible to many. She doesn't want to be saved. She wants to be seen. And for that, more than charm or sweet words are needed. It takes courage to dive into places where few dare, and that's where many give up. Not because she's difficult, but because she is complete. And when a woman becomes complete, she awakens two extremes in the world: admiration and fear. Admiration from those who also seek that integrity, and fear from those who still live in halves, waiting for someone to complete them. She doesn't want to complete anyone. She wants to overflow alongside someone who has also found themselves. Until then, she remains alone, not by the whim of fate, but out of loyalty to her own soul. This woman doesn't hide. She protects herself. There's a huge difference between isolating oneself and preserving oneself, but the world doesn't easily accept this type of woman. The world that still preaches that happily ever after only exists in pairs. The world that distrusts someone who doesn't have a partner, as if that were a sign of failure. Carl Jung said that where convention reigns, there's little space for authenticity. And this woman doesn't live by conventions. She lives by essence. She hears phrases like, "You're too demanding. You should open up more. Nobody's perfect." And she smiles, a serene, firm, almost ironic smile, because she knows that what many call demanding is simply the minimum she took decades to understand that she deserves. She doesn't seek perfection. She seeks someone with enough maturity to love without destroying. Someone who has done the inner work she has already faced. And let's be honest, that's not something you find just around the corner. The discomfort she provokes isn't in what she says, but in what she represents. She is the living proof that it's possible to be happy without depending on the other, and that strips away masks. Men who feed off female insecurity feel threatened. Women who are still trapped in the need for approval feel judged. But she isn't there to confront anyone. She's just being. And the authentic being of someone who has liberated themselves is, by itself, a brutal mirror for those who are still chained. This woman isn't in a hurry. She doesn't need to speed up processes to please others. She respects her own rhythms, and that's why she awakens a silent fury in a society that wants everything instantly. She wants depth while the world chases distractions. She wants presence while the world offers only superficial availability. She wants soul connections while everyone else is trying to appear interesting in the next Instagram story. And when she says no, it's not a game, it's a truth. When she steps away, it's not drama, it's self-defense. When she prefers to stay home alone instead of going out with someone empty, it's not arrogance, it's clarity. And that clarity, which she conquered with so much pain and dedication, is her greatest revolution. Because she doesn't live to please, she lives to be. And that simple act of being is what makes her so dangerous to the system. Perhaps what most unsettles people about this woman isn't her loneliness, but the peace she found within herself. Carl Jung taught that those who look outward dream, but those who look inward awaken. And it was precisely that inner journey she took. It wasn't easy. It was a painstaking process of shedding masks, facing the ghosts of emotional dependence, and rebuilding herself piece by piece. She no longer defines herself by the gaze of others. She sees herself with her own eyes, and that changes everything. How many times have you asked yourself if being alone is failure or freedom? How many times have you felt the weight of justifying yourself for not having someone by your side? This woman has been through that. She too once felt wrong for being alone in a world that idolizes couples, even when they're unhappy. But one day, she understood. It's better to be alone than to be invisible in a relationship. And that day, she made a pact with herself. Never again would she accept less than she deserves. This woman's path is not linear. There are days of doubt, moments of nostalgia, nights of deep silence. But there is also a strength that grows with every decision made from consciousness. She learned that true love does not enclose, does not absorb, does not manipulate. The love she desires is the one that frees, the one that adds, the one that supports without suffocating. And until that love manifests, she chooses to keep growing alone, not out of pride, but out of integrity. This woman is the living embodiment of Jung's individuation. She fragmented, faced the shadow, descended into the unconscious, and returned more complete than ever. And now that she recognizes herself, she is not willing to go back to being a half. She doesn't want someone to complete her. She wants someone with whom she can share this consciousness. It scares people because it demands emotional responsibility. Sadly, few are willing to love with responsibility. Most still love with lack, with possession, with fear. And if she walks alone today, it's because every step resonates with a lesson. Every no she offers is an act of self-respect. Every absence she imposes is a reminder that love should never be begged for. She no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. And this certainty, born from the deepest part of her soul, transforms everything around her. Because a woman who has reconnected with herself becomes dangerous, not because of her weapons, but because of her clarity. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend is not the same as the one who once begged to be loved. Something within her broke, and it was precisely that break that liberated her. Because sometimes it's only in collapse that the soul reorganizes. Carl Jung said that the tree that grows to the sky also needs roots that touch hell. And that's what she experienced. She descended into the hell of her own story, faced ancestral fears, inherited pains, traumas that were not only hers, but also those of all the women who came before. She broke cycles, said no to relationships that repeated the same toxic script, learned that it wasn't her responsibility to heal anyone, save anyone, or accept crumbs out of fear of loneliness. And when she stopped accepting, the world tried to convince her that she was wrong. But she stood firm, at first with insecurity, then with awareness, and finally with invulnerability. Because once you've inhabited your own abyss, you're not scared by absences. You learn to nourish yourself with silence, to warm yourself with your own presence. This woman is not unreachable. She simply no longer allows herself to be invaded. There's a huge difference between opening your heart and letting it be torn apart. She opens, yes, but only for those who come with truth, not rehearsed speeches or empty promises. She's seen enough to distinguish between presence and performance. Her intuition has become sharp, her energy a filter. What doesn't vibrate with depth, she perceives from afar and has no hesitation in walking away from it. Her transformation is not external, it's archetypal. It's as if she has access to ancient wisdom, an old memory that women were not born to serve, but to express themselves. She was not born to be molded, but to overflow. And by accessing that memory, something in her rose. A wild, intuitive, emotionally sovereign woman. A woman who, although she is alone, is not lost. She is in communion with something greater, with her own destiny. And no matter how much they try to reduce her to labels like cold, difficult, or insensitive, nothing sticks to her because she no longer lives to fit in. She lives to expand. She no longer fights for attention. She radiates presence. She no longer waits to be chosen. She chooses herself. And this reversal of logic confuses those who still try to control the feminine, but she is no longer there. She has crossed the portal, and on the other side, she discovered that the true relationship is the one built after loving oneself enough not to need anyone. There is something sacred in the way she walks through the world. She doesn't need applause or public validation. Her confidence is silent, and it is precisely in that silence where her strength resides. Carl Jung said that everything we face within ourselves eventually manifests as destiny. And perhaps that's why this woman, by choosing herself again and again, has become the master of a destiny that few manage to understand, but that many secretly envy. She no longer tries to fill voids with promises, nor does she try to convince anyone that she deserves love. She doesn't beg for space in anyone's life because she learned that presence is not begged for, it's invited. And when the invitation doesn't come from truth, she simply doesn't accept it. She doesn't react with anger or resentment. She just withdraws with the dignity of someone who has been lost too many times to allow the same wound again. What few understand is that this woman also desires to love. She also desires to be embraced, touched, chosen, but she wants it without losing herself because she has already spent too much time trying to fit into molds that are too small for the soul she carries within. Now she only gives herself where there is space to be whole, and that requires from the other a maturity that goes beyond romance. It demands awareness. It demands having faced one's own shadow and still choosing to love. She doesn't seek fairy tales. She seeks a soul alliance, an exchange where there is no dominance or submission, where each one can expand beside the other without dimming their colors, silencing their pains, or diminishing their dreams. And if that seems unattainable for some, it's fine because she prefers to wait rather than live on emotional crumbs. And for many, this sounds like arrogance, but it is simply self-love in its purest form. We are witnessing a new archetype of woman, a woman who renounced superficiality to dive into depth, who grew tired of being only desired and began to be respected, who chose to be alone, not because she has given up on love, but because she began to understand that true love never demands self-denial. And when a woman understands that, her whole world starts to change. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her presence speaks before words. Where she goes, there is a different vibration, as if the environment subtly changes. This is not mysticism. It is energy. It is the weight of someone who has already faced the cruelest inner battles and decided to return in peace, not because she conquered all her fears, but because she learned to live with them without being overcome. Carl Jung would say that she found wholeness, not by eliminating opposites, but by integrating them. This woman does not reject love. She simply learned not to submit to imbalanced relationships where one dims to let the other shine. She desires to love, but a love where her essence doesn't need to be edited. A love where she can be both shadow and light, laughter and tears, silence and storm, because she understands that those who love only the beautiful parts have not yet learned to love truly, and those who demand constant sweetness still do not grasp the beauty of the bitterness necessary for growth. She is too whole to settle for halves, too free to accept prisons disguised as care, too sensitive to submit to superficial connections, and at the same time strong enough to keep choosing this path, even if it hurts, even if it's lonely, even if it's misunderstood. This is the journey of the awakened soul, to renounce immediate validation in exchange for a deep truth. Deep down, the world fears women like her, women who don't need, women who don't bow, women who can't be molded because they challenge invisible structures, question ancient patterns, and break silent emotional contracts that said a woman is only valuable if she is accompanied. And when she breaks those contracts, when she rewrites her own narrative, she inspires others. And that, for the system, is dangerously revolutionary. So, she continues, sometimes with tears in her eyes, sometimes with her chest held high, but always with her feet firmly on the ground because now she knows she is not alone. She is with herself, and that after everything she has lived through is more than enough. The love that comes after this will not be salvation. It will be a celebration. It will not come to fill. It will come to overflow. When a woman decides to walk alone, the whole world seems to want to convince her that she is wrong. But deep down, she feels something inside her aligning. It is not pride or rebellion. It is a rare kind of wisdom that only arises in silence. The same wisdom Jung called individuation. The process of becoming who you truly are, without masks, without compromises. And when that happens, nothing outside of her has more power than the truth beating in her chest. This truth doesn't need to be loud. It can manifest in the way she closes a door without resentment, in the way she gathers herself when she feels the environment no longer nurtures her, or in how she smiles in peace, even without someone by her side, because she discovered that being alone is not a punishment. It is a vow of fidelity to her own soul. And the soul of an awakened woman does not submit, does not dim, does not beg. She simply is, and that is enough. the world will continue to try to tell her she is missing something. It will keep offering distractions, plastic princes, window dressing loves, but she has already seen behind the veil. She understood that it's not about finding someone, it's about never losing herself again. And when that understanding blossoms, everything changes. Desire becomes discernment, scarcity becomes choice, waiting becomes the path, and what once hurt now teaches. What once bound now frees. Can you feel it inside you, that restlessness, that spark? Maybe it was a memory, an ancient wound, a nostalgia that never made sense. Maybe it was the image of a woman you met, or the woman you've become. In either case, there is something that asks to be looked at more deeply, something that doesn't fit into the old molds, something that, if you allow it, can completely change the way you relate to love, to others, and above all, to yourself. That woman who lives alone is more than a profile outside the standard. She is a living symbol of emotional freedom, a reminder that it is possible to rebuild without haste, without fear, without having to prove anything to anyone. She does not walk in front of anyone, but neither does she walk behind. She walks her own parallel path, inviolable, and on that journey she lights small beacons for others who are also awakening. If something inside you was touched by this narrative, perhaps it's because deep down, you too are ready for a new kind of love. A love that begins with reconciliation with yourself. A love that is nourished by silence, presence, and truth. A love that is not negotiable, that is not begged for, that is not disguised. And if that love has not yet arrived, maybe it's because you first needed to become the woman who accepts no less than she deserves. Now, if this message found you at the right moment, or if it awakened someone inside you that you had forgotten existed, I invite you not to keep it just for yourself. Share this video with other women who need to remember their own strength. Like, comment, and subscribe to this channel, not out of impulse but by choice, because when something touches the soul, the least we can do is allow it to keep resonating within us and through us.